everyone. Welcome to our pre-recorded talk on the ghosts of Douglas County. I'm Tracy Rookard Shaw, the author of the book, and I want to personally thank the amazing Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American Culture and History for hosting this conversation tonight. We hope that you will leave this conversation being inspired to go and research in your own communities and learn about what African influences are there and resting in between the lines of the official record. So sit back, enjoy, and we hope to see you once we are out of COVID in person. Good morning.
Good morning, Tracy. How are you?
Great, thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me about your amazing book. First, I'd like to thank the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American Culture and History for giving us this platform to talk about the ghosts of Douglas County. First of all, what piqued your interest in the history of Douglas County?
Well, I became a resident of Douglas County in 2006, and when I came here, I had two little boys with me, and I've always been interested in history. So one of the things that you do when you come to a new area, you visit the museum and you visit the library. So we became very interested because there seemed to be like this dual story about the genesis of the county. What was documented was very clear about the county's namesake and the process that it went through to become created. But then there was also this other oral history that was resonating in the African American community about how the county was created, and another namesake that supposedly was at one point assigned to the county but was removed. But there wasn't really much documentation about it. And so I just became interested. I'm a researcher at heart. So I wanted to make a contribution and be able to do the research over a period of time to see if I could kind of ferret out what was going on in reference to the oral history, the documented history that you saw in the museum. And I did that here and there, but in the last couple of years, I became a little bit more serious about it because I heard the noise became louder about whether or not Frederick Douglass had a tie to Douglas County. Some people said he didn't, some people said he did. And so I just became more interested in that and decided to dedicate some time to doing the actual research. And so that's kind of how the process got started.
Great, that's very interesting. So I have read the book and I think that it is incredible. I'm a Georgia native, had zero idea about that part of Georgia history. Obviously, I'm not from Douglas County, but it is still very interesting to me as an African American woman, Georgia native. Without giving too much of the story away, because I think the twists and turns of it is what makes this book so unique. What was the most shocking thing for you in your research?
The most shocking thing for me, I'm going to say is shock, but it also was shock and yet validation because I knew it had to exist, was the extreme boldness of the African American men who served in office in 1868 and 1870. There's a level of courage that you have to have in that type of overtly racist environment to take office fresh from the clutches of slavery and with that stench still resonating in the atmosphere. You have the nerve to take office. And then on top of that, you have the audacity to be bold and deliberate. And so that was shocking to me, the level of boldness that they were, the things that they spoke about, the things that they wrote. And it was also validating because we wouldn't be in this position today in Douglas County, in Georgia, and the United States without the boldness of those legislators. And it wasn't just in Georgia. These were African Americans also there were also African Americans who were elected across the country in 1868 and 1870. But the ones who had a direct impact on Douglas County were, of course, those who were elected in the state of Georgia.
Wow, and in the backdrop of today's current political scene here in Georgia, where Georgia turning blue was, so pivotal in the presidential election, and then also to now have two Democratic senators, one being an African-American pastor here in Georgia. Looking at that, we know that that would not be possible today had it not been for the sacrifice and the boldness of those gentlemen back then. So it was very interesting to me as I read your book. It introduced me to these African American, and I would argue American heroes that were never taught in any of my Georgia public school curriculums. How do we fight to get these real history heroes included into what our kids, and not just African American kids, but children in Georgia, how do we get this history into the curriculums now?
Well, you start by having people commit time to doing the work, and I'll say that when you really look at the history that is, it's important that we have historians who can write our stories about our communities from the inside out. So while there are tons of historians, and we've had some really amazing ones over the course of the history of the country, there aren't a tremendous amount of African American historians. And so it's important that we continue, and that has grown, of course, exponentially over probably in the last decade or so, 2 decades. But it's important that we have historians who understand our community, our characteristics, our sensitivities, and who can tell our stories from the inside out and weave in to the conversation, the historical framework, our presence. And so what we have to do is to first document the history, and then after that, we can advocate to have it included in curriculum. And that's something that we are actively doing in this area.
That's awesome. Was there pushback? I mean, in reading the story, there was clearly pushback at the time, but all these years later, did you run into pushback trying to get the story told? Because what first came to mind when I heard the premise of the book before I actually had a chance to read it, people could argue it's one S. What's the big deal?
What's in a name? Everything. So when you say, did I get pushback? I will say that Douglas County has had wonderful historians in the past, and there is one particular historian that we looked at her work, and she inserted some oral history in it that kind of gave us an indicator of which directions we probably needed to go in to do the research. I will say that from a community perspective, it's like it's almost a tale of two cities in a sense, where you have this duality here of community, where there on one hand there is a reliance on the documents that have been provided thus far, but we have to understand that just because that's all that is there, it doesn't mean that that is all there is. And so the Black community, we relied heavily since we've been in this country on oral history. And so oral history, and then we use that as an indicator to be able to go and search out other information that might help corroborate a story for us. So I think any resistance to the story of Frederick Douglass was basically because there wasn't a lot of information provided, documentation presented to community. So you only had a couple of voices that were saying one thing, and then two, they too were at the kind of the mercy of their own scholarship, meaning that they were only able to take certain investigations so far. And I'll even say this: me as a scholar, there'll be some younger people coming behind me who will take my research and take it to another level, and that's what's supposed to happen. But I think the resistance comes from the fact that we have for a period of time have tried to document African American history in this country based on European standards. And what I mean by that is our history isn't always documented in the same way as the history in the other communities. We rely on oral history, we rely on secondary sources, we rely on primary sources, and what we do is we look at all three, and we take we take a preponderance of that evidence, and we use that to generate logic and then determine truth. Because I told a story in a previous interview, and I'll just say it here for the Auburn Avenue Library, that one of the things that shaped my research was the story of Alex Haley when he was writing Roots. And in his research, it took him down to a farm where he knew his family should have been. And so when he got into the archives, he couldn't find any of the names that he was looking for. And just so happened, there was a woman, an older woman sitting beside him, and she saw his frustration because he was going to give up. And she said, "What is the problem?" He says, "I know my people should be here, but I cannot find them." And she said, "Well, here's the deal. If your people are Black and they were born before 1865, your problem is you are looking for people when you should be looking for tools." And so he went to the tool register, and from there he was able to find Johnny, Sally, a plow, a rake. And so they were mixed in with that register. So what does that say to us about the way that we research African history? It says that we can't use a European model to always document our contributions, our existence in this the United States framework. We have to come at it in an abstract way. And so that is the brilliance of, I think, the scholarship of this book, because it expands beyond just what has been given in type text and put into the formal setting. It allows you to go beyond that and then be able to get look at the evidence, and you can also be able to establish logic and truth regarding this particular subject, which is the genesis of Douglas County.
Wow. And when you think about, and I think a lot of times, both within our community and in the larger community, people don't think about the fact that, just as you said, your research has to be different because of history. That African Americans were not considered people, they were considered property. And then to have to face that in order to both research and then also write from that perspective, it would be difficult for someone both in our community, but even greater for someone not with that understanding to be able to do that type of research and basically live it out and walk out what the history is and make it common, make it so that everyone can understand it. Wow, that is even a greater testament to what you did, and you did it in such a way that there is not finger pointing. It is just true journalism, if you will, in that here are the facts. This is what the facts have led me to see, but I will allow you to draw your own conclusion.
And let me just say, because if someone who hasn't read the book might say, well, slavery ended officially in 1865 at the end of the Civil War. Slavery was officially over for all African Americans. In 1863, it ended for some with the Emancipation Proclamation. But here's what we know is that just because that construct ended, that didn't change the very social component of slavery did not end, and we still see evidence of it still today in 2021. And so you had, even though Douglas County was created a mere 5 years after the end of the Civil War, it wasn't absolved from slavery, because the lands taken to create it are drenched with the blood, sweat, and tears of formerly enslaved Africans who were living in Carroll County and portions of Cobb County. So that history and those people who were interacting with enslavement were still there at the creation of Douglas County. And why is that important? That's important because we have to understand that those folks are the people that we were relying on to create the history. And in addition to that, one of the key things that and again, the abstract way, people don't really understand about when the African American legislators were elected initially in 1868. There was a push first in the Senate, but then it transferred over to the House of Representatives because there were more Democrats there. Because African Americans, remember, at this time were all Republicans.
Correct.
So, yes, they were all Republicans. So the Democrats in the House of Representatives, the numbers were greater. So they decided, let's start in the House, and we're going to start this to create some language that will eventually develop into a resolution that will expel the African American senator. I mean, House of African American Representatives initially. The senators went eventually, but they did it on the premise that you are not a citizen of this country. We freed you, but you're not a citizen. And so that was something that was devastating to those folks who thought so much about what 1865 meant to them as a black person, as a person of color, as an African American. So in that moment, it was almost as though it meant nothing. And so that a trauma from that event was very much connected to the creation of Douglas County, and we walk you through that in the book, so that you can see the connection to that.
Again, you did an amazing job doing that. I mean, I came away from reading the book with just this awe, and this urge to want to find out the history of the counties that, I'm in now and the county I grew up in, and find out, because we do know that in this whole country that we have a history that is responsible for building, and it's included in the patchwork of what America is. And you did an amazing job of showing us what some of that role that we played in Georgia in a small part. And what would you want your reader to take away from this book?
I want people to take away that there's always a story behind the story. And that while I may have started off the process looking for Frederick Douglass, what I found along the way were amazing, amazing people in our community who are unsung. And the African American legislators, and I know that we have a statue at the Capitol that talks about the amazing, we call them the original 33. Even some people who understand the original 33 might not even realize that it's actually the original 32, because in 1868, only 32 were elected. Number 33 came in 1870, and he was actually one of the ones who voted for the creation of Douglas County. So I would say that when you are going on your historical journey, don't put yourself in such a tight box that you're not able to listen to the other things that come in your path. It was almost as though ancestors were coming as I was doing the research and say, hey, look at me over here. Look, I have something to show you. Look under here. Look under there. Because we didn't really know where to go. We were guided. We were guided to this information in an amazing, divinely way. And so I will say that while it started off about Frederick, and it is about the most honorable Frederick Douglass, it's about that too. But it is probably more prominently about the African American legislators who were risking life and limb and their families and their ability to have a livelihood, all just to make sure that we were in a better place here. We don't realize the extent to which the past has gone to secure our future. And so I would say leave the book knowing that whenever you're doing, first of all, we need more African American researchers in our community. And we need people who can go into the research with an open mind, who understand, again, our characteristics, who understand our community, who kind of know. So I'm going to give you an example. I was talking to somebody when I was a young girl. I was born in 1968, and my brother Michael was a couple years older than I. And so my grandmother would say, now look, Don't run after dark, she would tell him. Don't run down the street after dark. Now, if you're not African American, that probably means just
Nothing, right?
fall and bump his knee or hurt himself. But when you
Exactly.
are a historian or when you are an African American hearing that, you understood that running for African Americans, especially boys, and at night, it aligned with theft or a crime or you have done something wrong. It would never align with you being on a health mission to try to just stay in shape. It wouldn't align with you playing a game with your friends. You were criminalized. From the time that you came out of the womb, there was a suspicion cloaked around you from the society gave, and that was her way of protecting him to make sure that that he had a future to evolve into. So I say that to say when I see certain things happen and I saw in the text, I knew why they were doing what they did because
Right.
I'm an African American woman. And I knew why certain things were being said. It was a protection that they were giving to their community, or there was a code language being spoken. And so again, easy for us to decipher. But again, it's a community thing. And one last thing I'm going to leave with that. Our new vice president, who is also my Link sister. I'm a member of the West Georgia chapter of the Links Incorporated. And so our new vice president, Kamala Harris, was walking down the street after the inauguration. She was headed, her whole family was out there. And there was someone who yelled at her from the crowd. And they asked her a question in reference to was she, her ability to, or feeling excited about taking on this role. And what she said to him was, you know, now the reporter said, oh, that's interesting. She said, you know, but if you're not
But
African
we knew.
understand Howard University, she was speaking Howard to him.
Yes.
She was speaking Howard to him. So there is code in our language that hasn't resonated to other communities. And that's why it's important that you have us at the table, that you have our scholarship, because we are the ones, and all of us, who can help to broaden the greater framework and make sure that we're woven throughout the entire fabric of American history.
Oh, I think that is absolutely true. And with regard to the story to your grandmother, I mean, if you think about things that happened in 2020, Ahmaud Arbery, and he was running, and like your grandmother, the protection was you don't run, and also you don't run in certain neighborhoods. You don't stay out of those neighborhoods. And don't do this, and those things that we take as code, and we know, and we have the talk with our children, especially our boys. Those are the things that transcend what you can write on paper, and it's the message, like you said, from the ancestors that come through, and that we are responsible for imparting to our younger generations. And you did an amazing job of making that very clear in your book, as far as the history of the past being whispered through to our future. I think you did an amazing job of showing that, and I'm excited that the book is now out, and encourage everyone to get that book. What's your next project? What are you working on next?
Well, I'm going to spend some time helping people to walk through this book first, but more African American history, that is my sweet spot. I believe it is my responsibility, and I enjoy it. So I had a focus, and I was not going to drop from that. But when I let that focus go away and I just looked at what was there, the story started to just unravel, and everything then connected.
Well, I look forward to whatever your next endeavor is, and it was my privilege to be able to read the book, and I thank you for that opportunity, and also for the opportunity to interview you today, and look forward to hearing from you soon and the next great thing that you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for taking the time out. Thank you to Auburn Avenue. I will just say library, and although they're closed due to COVID, please support the programming at that library. This is one of the programs that would have been in person in the larger hall there. And so a copy of the book is being donated to the library. So for those who may not have the resources to go and get it, you will be able to check it out for free at the Auburn Avenue Library once they are back open. So thank you so much. Happy Today is Sunday. Happy Sunday, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. Go research something.
I will. Take care.
Take care.